tell you, anyone who even looks at a woman lustfully already commits adultery with her in his heart. Or the same scripture in chapter 6 that we talked about, maybe it's in 5, that we talked about, he says, you've heard it said, do not murder. But I tell you what? I was just talking about. But I tell you, come on, man.
Anyone who hates your brother or is not your brother, you should pray to God first. For you even do communion, anything like that.
Okay, yeah, you're kind of intersecting two different scriptures, but yeah, that's part of it. No, that's legit. We talked about reconciliation. That's that same scripture. That's the same scripture that we referred to in chapter 5 that I was just talking about. You've heard us that do not murder, but anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. I tell you, anyone who is angry with his brother will be subject to judgment. I mean, the same thing. He's like, don't kill people, don't sleep around. Good idea. Don't lust and don't be angry with your brother. Be careful, because they're on the same playing field. I mean, these are radical teachings of Jesus. And most of the Christian world, when I say most of us, I don't just mean this room. I mean most of us, people like you and me, I've been under the impression that Jesus was just this like cool, hippie-ish, nice guy who was just kind of a pushover, kind of like this, he was a guy on the rock with the loincloth and the meditation. But Jesus is obviously directly much more powerful than that. These teachers, I hate to use the word, but I'm going to use it. The teachings are revolutionary against the world. That the ways of the world and the ways of this kingdom do not intersect. Okay, so. And we're going to get a little edgy. We've gotten a little edgy and stepped on a little bit of toes. Last week we started getting into the nitty-gritty. Who remembers what we talked, not last week, last time? What was kind of our subject matter? Let's begin the discussion. Karen.
The economics and the wealth and how we manage our wealth and what emphasis we put on.
Yeah, okay. Economics, wealth. A lot of us don't really understand this term, including me. The kingdom economics is basically what we're talking about. Where's my... is what we talked about last week and what we're going to continue to talk about. But who can tell me more? Economics, meaning wealth, goods, 1, 2. Aaron and then James.
Oh, I was going to say, another thing we talked about was just the whole idea in Ezekiel where it talks about being arrogant, overbearing, and concerned. Just like kind of seeing like this correlation between like America today and like our society environment and wealth and materialism and how we do that with like correlating to like scriptures in the Old Testament and why Solomon was destroyed.
Right. Okay, James.
Along the same lines, just like monetization, just like turning everything into commodities, like air, the water, whatever, so something that is material is not bought, it's just naturally.
Right. Right. We began to talk about the current economic structures of capitalism, of commodification, of this kind of way that we live in a consumer world. We live in a world of goods and stuff and wealth, and we kind of tied that into the Old Testament. This isn't a new idea, but that the Israelites were doing the exact same thing. We talked about how in Ezekiel it said we talked about Sodom and Gomorrah a little bit, and we said Sodom and Gomorrah crazy story. When you think Sodom and Gomorrah, you think sexual sin, right? You think, man, there were some issues. People sleeping around, sleeping with their parents, sleeping with animals. People are it's just a gross cesspool of deathly sin. I mean, it was this gross sexual, ugh. And that's true, and that was going on. But what is? But what was the kind of the primary concern that Ezekiel talks about? He says he's talking to Israel. He says you're just like your sister Sodom. He said you're the same way, and this was Sodom's sin. It wasn't the sexual. I mean, yeah, there's sexual morality, but her sin. What the big chief thing? It said that she was overfed. She neglected the poor. And what was the last one? Overfed, neglected the poor. Who just said it? Unconcerned. That was the word. Unconcerned, overfed, and neglected needs of the poor. That they were these people that were just unconcerned. I just am not concerned. I'm not concerned with what's going on in the world. I'm not concerned with the needs of other people. I'm overfed. Yes, that's a physical thing, but it's a state of mind. It's overfed. It's having a lot. It's having too much. It's being unrelatable. It's having this kind of essentially, the American dream. Essentially, not really. I mean, I'm not just boasting on. Or bashing the American dream, but whatever that is. But this idea of comfortability and just removal, and that was Sodom and Gomorrah's main issue, chief issue. That's in Ezekiel. I don't remember. 16. No, that's the allegory. It's in 16. You're right. It's the end of the allegory. So that's right. So anyway, so we talked about this idea of possessions and wealth and goods and relationship with that, and it was kind of a heavy talk, because then we read it in the crux of what we talked about was in Matthew 6, where Jesus says, He says, don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, or where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasure in heaven, where moth and rust don't destroy, where thieves can't break in and steal. And we talk about, once again, it's crazy how this works, because Jesus says straight up, he says, do not store up for yourselves treasure on earth. Just don't do it. And we read the parable of the rich fool, who's like, man, I got a lot of stuff. He's like, I got a lot of stuff going on. You know, he's like, I got barns, I'm rich, he's like, what should I do, you know, with all the crap I got going on? Right here. What should we do with all the crap we got going on? Well, I know what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and my stuff, and I'll get rid of all of it, and I'll build bigger ones. Okay, so he's like, I'll tear down my barns, I'll just build bigger barns, so I can store all my crap in there, and then, when I get older, I can just sit back, relax, chill out, and it says, you know, essentially, eat, drink, be merry, and live your life in comfort. And God's like, you're an idiot. Like, this is literally what he says. He's like, you fool, like, you're an idiot, because what you have today is going to be taken from you, and when you put your full trust and your validation, everything you are in possessions, when that happens to crumble and change, you're left with nothing. And that's exactly what ends up happening to the rich fool, and he just kind of drops that. So, don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth. And we talk about this idea, isn't it interesting that as we accumulate more and more stuff, we become more and more attached to it?
Yeah.
And I'm going to talk about this not at all in the way that I am above this, that I have figured this out. I'm simply just addressing the message. And we're going to talk more about the solutions. It was kind of heavy. It's like, well, it's weird because we have, like, and it's just the way society works. Like, we have different gadgets, and we have I this and I that, and I have an iMac, and we have these, I mean, it's fine. Like, we use them, they're tools, they're great. We have cars, we have houses, we have security. But we insure, you know, but as we have stuff that's worth more value and accumulate more and more and more, we kind of become a little bit more like attached to those things. You got to be careful. I mean, you got to watch them. You like, you got a house, you got a car, you want to lock the door, you want to install a security system, you want to make sure what? That thieves aren't going to break in and steal it. I mean, you got to make sure that you're not in a position where a thief, like a robber, is going to come in and take something from you that you have all your value and worth in. And we're talking about mothballs because most of us don't use mothballs. I mean, maybe some of us do. I'd be surprised. Old ladies use mothballs, okay? So maybe you do too. So these idea of mothballs are kind of like these little gross smelling things you put in your clothes so that moths or bugs or some sort of something doesn't come in, because moths chew up cloth and they don't ruin your clothes. So you put mothballs in there with all your stuff to ensure that your stuff's going to be okay. Or you put, you put a certain thing on your car, on whatever, to make sure that these things aren't going to break down. Isn't that interesting? Jesus says, don't bother storing for yourself treasure in heaven, on earth, where thieves break in and steal, rust destroys, and moths destroy. And so we're like, Jesus, I got you beat. I got an awesome security system. I got the mothballs set in place. My stuff's not going to rust over, right? I mean, so it's like, and it's not that we're just so arrogant, such a mess. I mean, maybe, but the point is, Jesus is addressing these issues, and I think it's something that we're going to be dealing with more and more in our society. That our world is constructed around stuff, and that as disciples, we're going to have to figure out what role. I was talking to Mikey after because it was just discouraging. Like, we have to figure out what role does stuff play. It's like, what do we do? Sell all our stuff? Like, is that the goal? Is that the solution? Why don't we just all get rid of? James will do that, but it's kind of like, why don't we all just get rid of everything? Thanks, man. That was really kind of you. It's like, let's just get rid of everything, and then we'll all just go live in the woods together and just party and have. But that's obviously not what God has in mind. So what did God set up? Did you find yourself asking these questions? Like, what am I supposed to do? Right.
Yeah.
That's what I did. I'm like, okay, he said don't store up treasures on earth. That's right, come on, you can raise that hand. It's kind of like, okay, well, I'm not supposed to store up treasures on earth, but I have stuff, like I have treasures, I have stuff. What am I supposed to do? Just not have a laptop, not have a cell phone, not have a car, not have a house? To live out of a shack? Is that what God has in mind?
Is it more just not getting upset about those things?
Well, this is exactly so that we come up with this idea of this concept of attachment. It's kind of, I don't think we're supposed to be attached to these things, because then the question becomes like, so what if you do lose that thing you spent all your money on? What happens if this doesn't fall through, or you do have, moths eating your clothes? What does that reveal about your heart? So I think the attachment's a part of it, but my question is this. Once again, because we're not supposed to live on the defense as disciples, right? I mean, you live on the defense, but that's not the goal. Therefore, it's not just like, okay, let's just ensure we won't get all consumeristic, materialistic.